Do we really want to continue talking about abortion? Why am I bringing it up? Hi, this is Michael Shevack. Welcome to God Search. I said earlier, way back, sooner or later we'd return a little bit to the abortion issue, but I am not returning there in a way that's there to bring greater conflict. As we say in God Search, wherever there is a conflict, there is missing knowledge. This subject matter on the God search of our entire nation has been so contentious that one must come to the conclusion that there is more missing knowledge than usual, because anything that is that contentious is that missing in knowledge in order to form a clear, cogent idea. So, by way of illustration to that point, and with the sincere desire that our nation's God search, if not the God search for the entire world, get put on a solid foundation of searching for truth with unity and the correct actions causing an effect to begin to move us in a right and positive direction. With that in mind, let's return to the abortion issue and see what it can teach us, not how we can rip our fabric of our society apart, but where can that contention be a liberator, a gift to us all. And it doesn't make a difference whether you're in the red team or the blue team. It's a human gift. So the reason I'm bringing it up now is that in the past podcasts, we've been talking a lot about a suggestion I'm making based upon my spiritual experience that we have more than one body. What we commonly call our physical body is really two bodies. It's a material or elemental body, composed of the matter of the earth, and that gets recycled back when we die. It's commonly called a corpse. And we have another part of us that is very active and vibrant and alive in thought. It's a luminous body. It's composed of light. Okay, it is more like a dream than it is something we would call solid. But regardless, these two bodies or these two aspects of the physical body, whichever way you want to describe it, there's a subtle difference, but I'm not going into it now. This approach to thinking about the human body opens up doors and helps us explain many, many, many things. It helps us explain the differences between marriages and different kinds of people and different kinds of orientations that create different kinds of marriage. It helps us explain gender variations. It helps us explain um, the inner sanctum of a person relative to the outer form of a person, which is a very important legal distinction between, let's say, the spirit of the law and the actual law itself. And it is I feel it's a very useful thing to explain more of what's going on this issue called abortion. So let's begin with that and then go from there. There's a principle here that I'd like to highlight. If you are a human being who is in a coma and you are on a respirator and you don't have much brain function to discuss, but your heart is being kept, beating and your breathing is kept going, are you not basically a fetus? Think about it. The fetus is basically on a respirator. It keeps its heart and its lung going, and there isn't much brain activity to speak of. Okay? We have to be very clear here that is a principle. The principle is there are more than one level to life. I'm highlighting only two levels. The other ones are for more advanced learning, and this is not the forum for me to do it in. Okay? But these two levels are clearly obvious that there's a distinction between, shall we say, a more vegetative aspect to human life and a more animal or animated from the Latin anima, which means soul. And that commonly we would call that a human being. Right? There are levels to who we are. The disgraceful thing about the abortion issue is that we have not properly dimensionalized these levels. So there is a goodly amount of confusion. Well, of course, there's confusion. How could there not be? Okay. Is a gastrula or a blastula or an embryo or a fetus, is it a soul? Well, does anyone really know what a soul is? A lot of us confuse it between a soul between spirit and a soul is something that enters the body and it's not always with the body. But there are other viewpoints, and they happen to be my viewpoint, by the way. And I'm not shoving it down anyone's throat. It's my viewpoint. It's an opinion. It's an opinion, which is that we are souls, that wherever there is so-called a body, there is also a soul. A soul is a enfleshed being. So to me, the body, what we commonly call a body, is an elemental sheath that surrounds the soul on the level and the plane of the earth. So I don't see everything sort of soul, body, soul, body, soul, body, because I think this stuff is a little bit nutty. Okay. Now, I don't know what a soul is. No one really knows what a soul is. But the principle of soul is very incredibly important because that is the principle enshrined in our Constitution. The Declaration of Independence expresses it as rights endowed by the Creator, meaning directly conferred to an individual as therefore a soul, though the Constitution doesn't use the word soul because the founding fathers probably were really a little squeamish about sounding too church-like because they had come from a very bad situation where the Church of England and the monarchy were fused into a single power system, and they just wanted to separate the powers. So they used different kinds of Enlightenment language that they picked up from the Enlightened philosophers. So the important thing is that there is a principle of multiple levels to life in the human being. And oh, by the way, these days when we're farming beef in laboratories, that's living tissue. So we have to distinguish living tissue from conscious life. And here we have to be very, very careful. It's not always clear, the boundary between what is living tissue and what is a living being. So there are multiple levels, but I'm not going to go into them as I told you, but I'm hinting at it. So there's that principle. There's the principle of the fact that there is a soul, meaning it's legally kind of created a different way by defining it as rights. And then here, either way you do it, there is a sacred individuality. There is a principle of sacred individuality that the abortion issue touches on. Very important sacred individuality. Each individual or each person or being has a right to exist as themselves. Okay. Now, once you do this, you step on another principle, which is the principle of proper adjudication. In other words, if you are weighing in a court of law, does the court of law consider the fact that the person is a soul, or is a soul a religious entity, and therefore you can't weigh it in a secular government? But if it's a secular government, why do they have rights endowed by the Creator? Is secular the same as non-religious? These are all of the issues that are brought up in the incredible, complex ignorance that comes up when we have to deal with the abortion issue. It's an incredible complex ignorance, and that's why it has been such an incredible complex conflict, because the ignorance is enormous. Now, we got some difficulties because, okay, so we had Roe versus Wade for a while, And now we don't have Roe versus Wade. All right. Now, the problem is that Roe versus Wade, in my opinion, was a lousy abortion law. It did not handle all of the difficult issues around what a human being is, what a soul is, what a fetus is, what is spiritual life. It is not a God search kind of concept. It did a marvelous job of securing certain principles which are incredibly sacred. One of these principles is the right to privacy, which is really what a Roe versus Wade was. It was a right to privacy. It did not permit government the right to invade in the territory of conception between a man and a woman. It didn't allow that. It defined a real, actual right to privacy, which is not in the Constitution. And just because it's not in the Constitution doesn't mean that you don't have that right. That was established by an earlier amendment. I forgot which one it was. But the principle of privacy, which is what Roe versus Wade was founded on, is the real tremendous loss to me of Roe versus Wade, because we need to put back this principle of privacy. It is essential for the inner life of a couple. It's essential, of course, for the inner life and the relationship of a mother to a body part. You know, in Hebrew it says, Uber Yerech Imo. It's the same as in Hebrew laws and Roman laws, which is the fetus is a thigh of the mother. It's a body part. You don't go in, and you just don't go in and invade into that territory. And one must be very careful. Here's a thought experiment, to use Einstein's phrase. I like that phrase. You know, let's suppose you're in a state where there is a national emergency, a big war, and the president of the United States, the commander in chief, needs a kidney. Okay, there's only one kidney that and left, and he needs another kidney, and there's only one person in the United States who has a perfect kidney for the president of the United States, and we're in a state of war. Does the government have a right to go in and take the kidney in order to protect the country? Or are there established rights to privacy, which are critical challenges to the authority of government? Roe versus Wade is has to be replaced, in my opinion, by a very thoughtful, intelligent right to privacy, not just for ourselves bodily, which is really the issue in terms of Roe versus Wade, and as well as different forms of marriages which are emerging. But it's critical, especially in our age of internet, where we are invading the details and the data of people's lives in a way which is rather promiscuous. So I would like to see Roe versus Wade refined as a privacy law. But I would also like us to begin to take a look more and deeply at this abortion issue. There is another principle that has been mangled in here, which is the principle of self-defense. You know, in ages past, when fertility was a real threat to womanhood, people cared oftentimes and favored the baby more than the mother. Many mothers would want that the baby would be favored more than they. But to legislate that, to say to a mother, give up your life, i.e., commit suicide for your child, well, that's something, there's a limit to that kind of knowledge. But there is clearly a principle of self-defense. If a mother is being attacked by a fetus, especially if there is something defective about the fetus, which is then causing an illness that could endanger the mother and hurt other children and destabilize the entire family. So one of the principles of privacy is very important, and a variation of that is that the principle of self-defense. Centuries ago, when women died more in childbirth, there were compensatory things that people used to do, such as men would have more than one wife. They would put, multiple cakes in multiple ovens, and it would compensate for the fact that the medical establishment had only primitive tools and childbirth was a very, very severe threat. These days, because of the advances in medicine, is that the sacredness of the woman's life is surfacing in a way that is which had never ever happened before because we have grown technologically. This is not particularly different than happened in the 1950s when dishwashers and washing machines and also and toasters and blenders and all this electronic stuff came up, and basically the woman began to become bored in her own household because the work was so easy, it didn't occupy her, and she was able to think about other things. And thus, from that kind of technological advance, you had an amazing women's movement that began to flourish off of it. Very much a result of technology, no different than medical technology, has produced very much this issue of a woman's sacredness to her privacy and her personal life. And it's not just subsequent to the life of the fetus. On the other hand, society really must sanctify core principles, and there is a core principle here that the evolution of the future outweighs the past and the present, although the future is composed of the present and is composed of the past, and the past needs to evolve into the present in a way that is flourishing and which is harmonizing and increases the presence of goodness or God. It is also true that we have to always be focused on the future and what the future comes, and evolution and abortion as a principle undermines or seems to undermine the core principle of future orientation, which is at the foundation of all covenantal religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and our world global secular culture, which is all future oriented and progression oriented because it is based on the prophetic viewpoint of the Hebrews, which is that. And it was the great innovation that the Hebrews brought the entire world. The other principle that emerges on abortion is it natural or not? It seems to be an artificial intrusion of the human being into what is natural. But then again, that's one principle. It should be as natural as possible. Why destroy the planet? Why destroy the ecology unnecessarily? But at the same exact time, as it may seem to be unnatural and a violation of nature and evolution, it does exist in nature. And as we spoke about, there are horses when stallions rape the mares, if they don't want the baby, find their way into the garden to find a certain herb, and they eat the herb and they will tend to abort the foal. Right? Meaning they have an instinct on what child to bear and what child shouldn't. Well, shouldn't any woman who accidentally or is raped or anything and gets a pregnancy that of a man that she considers to be defective, shouldn't that option exist? Well, now we have another principle that takes place. The other principle is, are human beings animals? We have said earlier that we are natural, but we are also supernatural. And just because something exists in nature, does that mean that the human nature should abide by it? Well, let's get clear here. Should we eat our children like a spider or a mother cat? I remember that very early as a child, noticing that we had a mother cat who had given birth, and we were very, very afraid to enter into it because she enter the little, nursery where she had the babies, because if there was interference, she might eat her little kittens. That was well known. Well, do we eat our own children? Even though that's maybe perfectly natural to certain species. No, we don't do that. There's a human exceptionalism. We talk about national exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, covenantal exceptionalism. But there's a kind of human exceptionalism, which is really the origin of the whole thing, where, we will make wallets and shoes out of other animals' hides, but we don't make them out of human hide. There are societies that tried that pretty recently, and it was considered a barbarism. But the fact is that human beings are not merely animals. And weighing the abortion issue against animal life is kind of reducing it to a farming issue, because indeed, uh, you know, artificial insemination and then abortion, these are all farming techniques in animal husbandry, which brings us yet to another curious thing. Well, what happens? How unrestricted should we be? Let's suppose we do not curtail reproduction in the United States, which abortion is one tool, and then we populate and populate and populate, and then we follow Elon Musk and we go to Mars. Should we freeze embryos and freeze semen and freeze eggs on board a rocket ship going to Mars and then populate people that way? Well, of course, that's a much more economical and faster, more efficient way to put a population on Mars. But in that process, of course, there are going to be a lot of fetuses that die, and that technological advance, which is supposedly there to preserve us and help us survive, brings us right back to the whole issue on abortion and whether or not such the wanton destruction of embryos is the wanton destruction of human beings. Is abortion murder? Is the embryo an actual complete human soul? Now, if it is murder, that's a perfectly understandable position. It is certainly potential human being. But if it is murder, we don't legislate it the same way. The mother may be held responsible for the murder, but not the doctor may be held responsible for the murder, but the mother isn't. We don't put women in jail for having abortions. It doesn't make any sense. So then when you have a murder trial, it's murder one and murder two, is it manslaughter? There are many different categories for evaluating scales of murder. And yet abortion, if it is murder, does not get the same kind of legal lenience. Well, if it is murder, it should be treated as murder. And here we have a juridical problem where one thing that's held to be philosophically or theologically murder is not treated legally as murder. Well, here is again another problem. And it harkens back to another principle that we spoke about earlier on jurisprudence, which is the fetus a citizen? Or is the fetus only a citizen after it is born? And then it has left the jurisdiction of the mother as the nation. This very harkens back to Sarah and Rebecca and biblical things where the woman is defining the citizenship of the person, as Sarah versus Hagar is a really good example, and leaves the fetus leaves the domain of the woman and then goes into the domain of the larger nation and society. Well, how do you determine citizenship? Does a government which is elected by the officials by a plurality of votes, not even a majority? I mean, with these days, it's we hardly have anything that resembles a majority, and it's becoming a dictatorship of the legislature, which is disgrace. Not the legislature of the courts. The elections are becoming controlled by the court decisions. It's a disgraceful thing. I mean, what do you do? I mean, who's a citizen? How do you determine citizenship? In a country where you have people who are elected by popular vote, do they determine citizenship by democratic decisions? This is all so very, very confusing. Then there are other principles. Hey, it just doesn't stop on this subject matter. The right of a person to choose. Do they want to reproduce or do they not? There was an urgency many centuries ago to reproduce. You still have some politicians calling people, saying they're potentially insane if they don't reproduce. Okay, well, there are priests and many, many people who don't reproduce, and I wouldn't call them naturally, inclined towards insanity. I think that's a little bit of an extreme. But you have a right of a person to choose, a right of a person to choose if they want to have children. We are also technological beings. We do have a right to choose when we wish to have children and make it part of a conscious life. You might call that planned parenthood, which is a very, very interesting idea. Some people may say it's completely unnatural, but then again, we're back to the same problem. What's natural? What's artificial? Are human beings natural, or are we also supernatural? So let's face it, we have a rather confused country. And the magnificent thing about the abortion issue is not that it produces so much contention and so much silliness, right? And people who are arguing with each other and arguing and more arguing and ripping apart the fabric of our country to be whether or not we are a theocratic nation which legislates for the human soul, like a church or a religion, or whether we are a separation of church and state, separation of religion from secular authority. And that's who we are. But that's the rift that's taken place. But the ignorances underneath are so enormous, and we have failed to look at all of the confusion and the principles, the multiple principles that this issue opens up. And instead of looking at it through the eyes of a God search, an authentic God search, where you're looking for the knowledge, knowing that looking for the knowledge will produce the truth and the unity and greater correct action. What happens is we fall into the fighting. So what I'd like you to do first is go to yourgodsearch.com, please, and enter into this conversation. Try to keep the contentiousness down. All right. We don't need that kind of contentiousness in the United States of America, let alone the world right now. It's spreading all over the place, that degree of contention. But get on yourgodsearch.com and open up a discussion for the sake of knowledge, for the sake of searching for the truth together. That's the purpose of the democratic process. Is that if you're going to spar and you're going to kind of duke each other out on whose opinion is right, you're doing it not so that you win over someone else or they win over you. You're doing it because you're a human being that is natural and spiritual, supernatural, beyond merely earthly nature. And the complexity of our questions and our choices outweighs completely that of any other creature that we know of currently on the face of the earth. Where there is missing knowledge, there is conflict. And wherever there is conflict, there is missing knowledge. And I'm adding something else. The more conflict, the greater the missing knowledge. So please think about this abortion issue. Let us not now spend the next 30 years cycling. So Roe versus Wade is gone. There's no right in the Constitution to abortion. And we take that to a zenith in another 60 years and bang, we now put it back. And then that goes to another cycle and we go back and we get rid of it. And we cycle and we cycle and we cycle and we cycle, which is what's going on right now. We are cycling. We are getting rid of many, many things that have been in place from Roosevelt to Johnson to that entire democratic kind of flow. And we're putting back more conservative, more clear, theologically traditional lines. They're both wonderful views, but they are not competitive where one destroys the other and the other destroys the other. That viewpoint on competition is sickness. It is not an authentic God search. An authentic God search is the search for truth, unity, and correct action with the least harm and the greatest harmony. This is Michael Shevack for God Search. So take a look at your life. Take a look at these issues and look for the depth of the meaning, the principles to human life that come in conflict, and unknot the problems. Unknot the problems. If you unknot the problems in your mind, they will not be created in form through the material body, which is part of who we are. And we won't have to live through the materialization of our absurd thinking in order to realize what works and what doesn't work and what should be a part of human life and what shouldn't. So continue your God search, keep growing, keep evolving, keep thinking, keep exploring, and be it. Take the gift of conflict as a place where you can learn, not as something you should shy away from or battle. But the gift of conflict is, what can we learn? This is Michael Shevack. Uncover God, discover God, recover God, and recover God from every single place that believes it has the truth and can pass themselves off as authority. I, frankly, have absolutely not enough knowledge to decide the issue of abortion myself. I can't do it. I've tried, but I can't come to a simple answer. I can't do it. I failed. So anyone out there who wants to help, great. I'd love to hear from you. Come join us next week on God Search, 5:45 on Wednesday Eastern daytime. I'll be there. Hope you're there too. God bless. Bye-bye.